Hello, everyone. I think we are live now. If you're able to see me live, just leave a comment, say hi, let me know where you're listening in from. I'm just waiting for a few people to join so that we can just get started on the discussion. If you are seeing me or hearing me for the first time, I am Saujanya Vijayanagar. I'm a canine behavior consultant and founder of Dog Promise. And I work with dog parents and dogs who are finding it hard to manage certain difficult situations and work together in figuring out how to manage them. So that's what I do. If you're online, if you're watching us, watching me, then do leave a comment so I'm aware that you are able to see me. Okay. Uh, why am I here live? I I mean, in India, we have recently come across a particularly horrible case of an aversive training gone wrong. The video, the situation was very triggering for me to watch, for me to encounter. Uh, I I was pretty disturbed watching it, and I felt like we need to talk about this, even though it is triggering for a lot of us. More so, I wanted to talk about why are we outraging when things go so wrong, when things go out of hand, when things escalate so badly that a dog has to lose its life. Uh, and why can we not have these conversations, these discussions, um, and advocate for our dogs proactively? And I think that's the conversation I wanted to have because there is no point in discussing this one case, this one incident, this one situation, because it has happened and there's nothing much you can do about this case. But this one problem, this one case is a part of a bigger, issue, um, and we need to address that. So I wanted to talk about that. While I share my thoughts and share why I'm here and why I'm talking about this, why don't you share your thoughts, comment about if you've heard about this incident or any incident for that matter, where you have seen aversives uh, really go out of hand. Um, just leave your thoughts about what goes on in your mind. How do you kind of cope with this issue and this incident, and what you wish we do going forward so that more dogs don't end up being victims of aversive methods. So, with that, let me get started with what I wanted to talk about today. Um, if we need to advocate for our dogs and be able to identify if a certain training method is aversive or not, uh, we need to be able to first know what aversives are, uh, how do they work, who decides what is aversive or not, and then we will obviously discuss different arguments given in support of aversive methods and what I have to say about them. And finally, uh, maybe I could share a few things that you can keep in mind when you do reach out to behavior professionals and what you need to keep in mind when you work with them. So let's get started. Um, when you work with a dog behavior professional via training and behavior modification, you need to know that there are a certain set of uh, behavior modification science behind this and uh, what kind of approach is being taken. Right now, I won't get too technical about these things because you can just Google about it. It's available everywhere, and you can think about you could find out and research more about operant conditioning, classical conditioning, and all of these things. But I want to talk about uh, essentially what it is. What do we see in our behavior training spaces? Um, so there's one. Firstly, behavior modification is mostly about you have certain set of behaviors and you don't want them. You want to replace it with certain other behaviors and you want them, right? So you want to increase the frequency of some behaviors that we find desirable, and we want to reduce the frequency of certain behaviors that we find undesirable. How do we reduce the frequency of behaviors that are undesirable? You respond to those behaviors uh, in a way to convey your um, discontent to the dog about those behaviors. So let's say they're barking and you don't like and you don't want them to indulge in barking behavior. You respond to the dog, to the behavior, by sharing that you don't like this behavior. So the dog needs to be able to understand that you are saying you don't like it, which means that they have to feel something that's unpleasant, a consequence that's unpleasant, to be able to say this behavior means this consequence, which is unpleasant for me. And the more I'm feeling that unpleasantness, the less I will do that behavior, right? On the other hand, you want some behavior to occur more frequently, and the more your dog uh, exhibits that behavior, you respond with a positive consequence, which then makes your dog feel nice about that consequence, and they start giving that behavior more and more. This is a very simplified version of operant conditioning. Um, but um, this kind of reduces our dogs to just, it feels like, we're reducing sentient beings, sapient beings, to just um, behaviors and consequences. That's it. You know, don't they have thought processes? Don't they think through a little bit about the situation? Um, some behaviors are involuntary responses, so they may not even be able to change it. For example, a dog who, like Sammy, he used to have a severe gut issue that created hyperactivity around food. It was absolutely not in his control uh, to be less hyper around food, because it was involuntary, it was triggered by some health concern. And no matter how we would have responded to the behavior in itself, if we didn't like hyperactivity, uh, there was no way of changing that behavior because it was involuntary. It was happening so subconsciously and so out of his control that no matter what we would have responded him with, whatever consequences he would have been dealt with, he would have responded in the same behavior because it was happening because of a whole other reason. So if we think about our dogs as individuals who are only processing consequences and then only responding to consequences, then aren't we neglecting the idea of our dogs having thought processes, having internal needs, having survival needs that they need to meet irrespective of what consequences they deal with from the humans? Aren't we forgetting that what we may think is pleasant or unpleasant for our dogs might be perceived in a very different way by our dogs? Uh, why would we assume that something that we think is pleasant for the dog actually is pleasant for the dog? So, how do we decide whether something is a good consequence or a bad consequence? And why reduce our dogs to simplistic, as if they're a simplistic machine where you input a certain code and give some inputs and you get the same outputs every single time? Uh, so this is how basically operant conditioning uh, uh, works, and that's the basis of most training methods. So any behavior modification that you see either employs positive consequences to good behaviors and encourage good behaviors through positive consequences that we call rewards, um, or um, meet the dogs with negative consequences, uh, which makes the experience unpleasant for the dogs, and they reduce those behaviors. Now, it's easy to identify some aversives, right? It's easy to identify when someone beats up a dog and say that, yes, that's aversive. It's easy to watch a video of a dog being hung and choked to death and say that's aversive. Mm, but there are some aversives that are not easy to recognize. How do we say there are some methods that are aversive and some that are not? Um, to be honest, the only individual who can decide if something is aversive or not um, is the dog in question. Um, so when Zoe was much younger, when she was told multiple times by different trainers that she needs to be crate trained, and they gave us all kinds of training methods and training approach to make her feel comfortable um, in the crate. But she did not appreciate it. She did not like it. She struggled. She was so uncomfortable with it, to the point where she would whine nonstop. She would bite on the crate edges and walls. She would bite on the crate grill, and she didn't like it at all. Um, you could argue that if once your dog gets used to it, dogs start loving crate. But in this situation, Zoe is the only one who gets to decide whether it was aversive experience to her or not. And to her, it was an extremely aversive experience. And she felt very unpleasant about that situation. So, aversive, essentially, if I were to think about it, I would probably just say an unpleasant experience for an individual, and the individual gets to decide whether something is unpleasant or not. And also denying them basic needs to survive. So both these combined would qualify as aversive when I look at a situation. Um, the whole point of using certain tools um, to reduce certain behaviors is that they cause discomfort. Why would your dog stop pulling on leash on a collar or a choke collar, and you yank the collar a little bit and tighten it even a little bit, and your dog stops pulling? Why would that happen? If you're thinking about it from operant conditioning point of view, it has to be uncomfortable enough, cause enough distress for your dog to feel like if I do this again, I will feel the same amount of pain and discomfort, and I don't like that discomfort, and I will thus not indulge in that behavior. If you are using operant conditioning uh, theories, then you know that if you're making your dog feel uncomfortable, it's only then that they will stop or reduce those behaviors, because they don't want to feel uncomfortable repeatedly. They don't want to be beaten repeatedly. They don't want to be yelled at repeatedly. So they choose the better alternative, which is not indulge in the behavior, which ensures safety, right? Um, but you might just manage to change the behavior superficially. Does that actually change the situation for our dog, though? I think that's something that we need to discuss as well. So when someone says that A tool is not aversive. A tool does not cause pain. A tool does not cause discomfort. It's important to go back and think again as to what is the purpose of that tool. If that was not causing discomfort, if that was not causing pain, if that was not causing distress to your dog, enough distress that they stop indulging in behaviors that they want to indulge in that situation, given the environmental conditions and internal state that they are in, uh, and they're choosing instead to not display that behavior, not communicate that with you, um, it should cause enough discomfort for them to not be authentic in front of you and then communicate that to you, right? Um, so I think it's important to keep going back to this basic. How, what is the approach? How are people uh, using the tool? If the tool is being used to repeatedly cause discomfort enough for your dog to stop behaving in a way they would naturally do, then yes, it causes pain, it causes discomfort, it is aversive for the dog. That's why they're changing the behavior. That is exactly why the behavior is changing, right? So it's important to remember that, keep reminding yourself of that, because uh, let's not get fooled by the fact that someone says it doesn't cause enough, discomfort. It's not painful, you know, it is painful, it is uncomfortable, it is distressing for the dog. And that's exactly why it works, the way it works. Now, some more arguments that are made in favor of aversives, and I'm sure that if you're watching this, if you've known me, if you know my work and follow it, then I know that you are on the same page that aversives are not the way to go while working with our dogs. But we do encounter so many arguments in favor of aversives, and in those moments I think we are quite defeated because we don't know how best to counter these arguments, how best to respond, and how best to advocate for your dogs. So I feel like these are a few things that um, we want to kind of discuss a little bit. So one, I obviously spoke about already, that they do not cause discomfort. You would, I mean, not so long ago, I saw a video of this so-called trainer who put a prong around his neck, and he attached that leash to a vehicle, a car, and he's like, I'm going to pull the car and I'll show you that I'm not feeling uncomfortable. And so the prong collars don't hurt. Now, there couldn't have been a bigger display of toxic masculinity out there, uh, but you will see this repeatedly with, aversive um, training approach, where they try and then justify that shock collars don't shock them enough and cause hurt, prong collars don't poke them enough and they don't cause hurt, martingale collars don't choke them enough, or choke collars don't choke them enough to cause hurt, crates don't cause discomfort, isolation doesn't cause discomfort, water sprays don't cause stress. You will hear all these arguments. The only question that you need to remind yourself is that, how is it working then? If it's not causing pain, what is it doing then for the dog? Remind yourself of that thought process, the underlying theory that they're using for the training method. I've also heard a lot of people say that, you know gentle positive ways only work with, easy dogs. They don't work with difficult dogs. They don't work with so-called uh, tough dogs, difficult ones, aggressive ones, bad dogs. It doesn't work with them. Um, Firstly, I mean, if you mm, are already labeling a dog as a good dog and a bad dog, I think we've already lost the battle there, because uh, it is important to remind ourselves repeatedly that there are no bad dogs, there are only dogs who are struggling. And if you can't see that and you label the dog instead as a bad dog, aggressive dog, a stubborn dog, a dominant dog, an alpha dog, and whatnot, if we have gone around on that path, we have already lost the battle there, because you think that there's something wrong with the dog, not something wrong with the environment and the conditions and the routine and the internal state and health physiology, all of that contributing to behaviors, and behavior is only acting as communication to you. So we have already lost the battle there if you start labeling dogs as good dogs and bad dogs. And it's very unfortunate when we all start trying to work towards achieving a dog to fit into a box of these are the behaviors I want my dog to display, and these are the behaviors I don't want my dog to display. How many of us manage to control certain behaviors of ours which stem from anger, from discontent, from sadness, pain, grief? Um, so many of us, still have behaviors that translate in, that could be translated into bad behaviors, socially unacceptable behaviors, just because they don't understand where it's coming from. So, I mean, firstly, I would believe that there are no difficult dogs, there are no bad dogs. Second is, many of us who have chosen to remain gentle, empathetic, compassionate, and scientific towards our dogs and situations have seen amazing improvement, amazing transition journey, healing journey of our dogs from so-called difficult situations to a coexistence and harmony that the humans and the dogs come into in the same life. Uh, 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 so I wonder how many of us have actually tried to explore, gentle methods. And to be honest, like Surabhi said when I was discussing this with her, she was like, um, if I can achieve the same thing using compassionate and empathetic ways, then what is the need for an aversive? And if you don't know that compassionate ways work, gentle ways work, then educate yourself about it, because so many people all over the world are using empathetic ways to work with dogs, children. So I think if you feel like it doesn't work, then I think there is a need to be educating yourself first before you even work with dogs. um, I mean, as harsh as it may sound, as blunt as it may sound, I think it's important that we really recognize the fact that we can't anymore stand behind this argument that compassionate, empathetic ways don't work. Um, the other thing is, and this can be triggering for a lot of you who are listening, but we do hear a lot of people justifying punishments, aversive ways, by saying that we were dealt with aversives too. We were hit, we were beaten up, we were yelled at, we were uh, you know punished in far worse ways, and we turned out fine. I think this is something that I've heard a lot, uh, which is given as a justification to aversive methods. And something to think about here would be, if we grow up to believe that it's okay to hurt another individual, to use power dynamics and power hierarchy to exert that control on another individual, um, to suppress another individual, then did we really turn out fine? It's a question to ask yourself, and it's important that we reflect on this bit a little. It might be hard for a lot of us to hear this, because it means that a lot of us are ourselves struggling as well. So it's important that we even look back and think about that, if we are ready to, suppress another individual, control another individual to a point of where it can be considered as psychological and emotional abuse as well. Uh, did we really turn out fine? It's important to think about that as well. And finally, there are also arguments around the fact that, dogs do need disciplining. So there's nothing wrong in disciplining them every once in a while when they behave badly. Um, Again, a few questions here. Who decides what is behave badly and behave well? Who am I to tell whether a particular behavior displayed by my dog is a good behavior or a bad behavior? Um, Something to think about. And if it is a socially acceptable behavior and we are trying to uh, get them to conform to a socially acceptable individual, um, who decides the standards? Who decides what are the acceptable behaviors and what are not acceptable behaviors? Some might say, I'm okay with barking. Some might say, I'm okay with jumping. Some might say, the only thing I'm not okay with is biting. Some might say, I'm okay with my dog standing. I don't need my dog to sit. Like, who decides this bit about good and bad behavior, acceptable and not acceptable behavior, desirable, undesirable behavior? And who am I to, decide that for my dog? Uh, you and I might have very different coping mechanisms in distressing times. Um, if I need to support you while you're distressed, I cannot do that while judging your coping mechanism. Whether I agree with your coping ways or not, if I need to support you when you're struggling, it has to happen outside of my judgment of your coping ways. Uh, it's also important to firstly recognize it's a coping mechanism as well. So I think that's one part of the argument around disciplining. Second part is, uh, how do you know that the communication that your dog is getting through these aversives is that they're being disciplined? I mean, if I were to put my dog in a crate, she would not believe that she's being disciplined for something uh, that she did. She would actually be like, I can't trust you. I mean, if you're calling me tomorrow for something, I'll assume that you're going to put me in the crate. That was a very, very horrible experience for me. And so I will not come to you when you call me. That would be her learning. So who is to say what are they learning from that experience? Are they really learning what we want them to learn? And what is it that we want them to learn? Some things to think about here as well. What is this disciplining that we're talking about? Um, and who said boundaries? And I don't like to use the word discipline because it has today become a euphemism for punishment. So I don't like to use the word discipline anymore, but I do talk about boundaries. And it's fair to have boundaries. I have my boundaries. In the recent times, I've not been very highly emotionally available for Zoe because I'm struggling as well. Um, so I have my boundaries of what I can contribute towards her right now with my energies and what I cannot, what I'm okay with, what I'm not okay with, what is probably okay for her, what is not okay for her in terms of safety and health and risk factors. So, who said that when you use a compassionate way to address a situation, you why the assumption that there are no boundaries in such a approach? Why believe that disciplining and boundaries can only happen when it is uh, causing enough discomfort for your dog for them to just not display that behavior anymore? So I think these are few things to you know think about and ponder over, reflect on when someone uh, justifies aversive ways. Um, the next thing that I wanted to talk about is that a lot of people also say that, or, let's just, take a couple of steps back, and we see a lot of studies on aversive methods, on reinforced, R plus methods, force free methods, and uh, often, the studies talk about the effectiveness of these methods, and which method is more effective. Again, few questions to ask here and reflect upon here as well. um, when we say a method works or a method is effective, how are we measuring that? Effective for whom? Whose problem is getting solved? Um who is being helped in that situation? What skills have been, gained through this process? So it's important to think about, one, what do you mean when you say a method is effective? And most often the comparison is about how well a particular method has managed to change the behavior, and which then goes on to ask, like, answer the question of for whom is it actually solving the issue, because clearly it seems to be solving the issue for the humans. So if I find a certain behavior desirable or undesirable, I'm able to manage and then change that behavior to whatever suits me. So it kind of helps solving my situation. There was a great quote, I think a paragraph that I was from a book that I was just reading yesterday. It's called Unconditional Parenting. And I think it is so relevant in what we are discussing right now. So the book's name is Unconditional Parenting. I will leave the name of the books that I'm talking about once the live is done in comments as well. Uh, but I'll read a couple of passages from this book. This is about parenting children, but it kind of works when we talk about being dog caregivers as well, right? Um, the first passage that I wanted to read was, but while it can be frustrating to read about techniques that prove to be ineffective, it's much more dangerous when books never even bother to ask, what do we mean by effective? When we fail to examine our objectives, we are left by default with practices that are intended solely to get kids to do what they are told. That means we are focusing only on what's most convenient for us, not on what they need. I mean, it just replicates what I was trying to tell about aversives when we are talking about dogs. Um, Another passage from here. What exactly do you mean by effective? Are you suggesting that children will be better off, psychologically speaking, as a result of X? Will they become more concerned about the impact of their actions on other people? Or is X just more likely to produce mindless obedience? It's worth thinking, what do training methods do for our dogs? Are we expecting um, processing, environment processing by our dogs? Are we expecting, are we hoping to achieve uh, effective communication with them? Are we hoping to achieve a way to understand what behaviors mean? Or training methods seem to be focused solely on getting our dogs to obey whatever we ask them to do mindlessly without using their cognitive abilities. And let's not undermine their cognitive abilities. Um, the final passage, and I think this is a very important passage, the evidence suggests that even disciplinary techniques that seem to work in double quotes often turn out to be much less successful when judged by more meaningful criteria. The child's commitment to a given behavior is often shallow and the behavior is therefore short lived. Uh, I have had, like, one of the oldest cases that I remember, this was one of my first cases when I started working as a behavior consultant, was of a dog who was biting kids in the same house, in the family. And this was the issue even before they came to me, and the dog was sent to a trainer who used aversive methods. And dog came back home, and the behaviors were essentially not addressed. Um, so it really is important to think about, firstly, what do you mean by effective? For whom is it effective? For whom is it solving the issue? And how long is this sustainable? The changes in these behaviors that you're seeing, is it sustainable? So it's important to think about these things as well when you talk about aversives. Um, so I do want to share a bit about how I would work on a case, because if I am saying that some methods are focusing only on the human perspective and solving the problem for the humans, then there has to be something else that you know uh, that might be actually working for both dogs and the humans. Um, and you can actually check out Barks. I will also leave the links in the comments again. And Barks, Canon Essential 101 is a great place to start. Sindhu's book called Dog Knows is a great place to start as well. But it's when I, or let me give the example of Zoe, right? In the recent few months, it's become very hard to actually figure out some behaviors exhibited by her. Um, she starts to get very agitated in the evenings. Um, and her agitation goes anywhere from pacing around to kind of grabbing certain things in her mouth and like kind of chewing on them, sometimes going and barking at things, sometimes toppling her bowl. Uh, so there's a lot of like fidgetiness and restlessness during the evening times. And this used to happen, I think this started happening very frequently since I think around April, May. And my assumption at that time was Zoe's behaviors were indicative of the recent changes in life that we had had, with me getting married and then we moving to my husband and moving to a different house, and the dogs accompanying us. So a new house, new environment to be in, but also the fact that Sammy was dealing with a lot of health issues. So we were very highly focused on his health needs. Post which, we lost him. So there was grief that we were all coping with and dealing with. Um, so over the period of last few months, Zoe has experienced huge changes in life, in environment. Um, and I first attributed this restlessness and fidgetiness to uh, these incidents, and but I didn't know how to solve the problem. So first I assume that she's feeling understimulated, she's feeling bored. um, and so we were doing a lot more enrichment with her, but that was not solving the problem for her. We then thought maybe it is a need to connect with her humans, because evening is the time when we probably sit and then chill around, watch something on Netflix, maybe cook a little bit. So that's the time when we are mostly chilling around. Sometimes my husband and I, if we are obviously quite busy, then we are also working and on our system sometimes. So we wondered, maybe is it a need to connect with the humans and she's unable to meet those needs because we are unavailable at that moment. um, which is when when she started showing the initial signs of these behaviors of being fidgety and restless. I would then go sit with her and then connect with her, interact with her, be with her. And sometimes it helped, sometimes it didn't, which then drove me to figure out maybe it's something else. Maybe she's hungry. She's feeling like she's uh, undernourished. which then led to me speaking to her nutritionist, who's Surabhi of Luchi and Muttons. You must have heard me talk about her quite a bit. Um, and we just decided that, we it may not be hunger, but I told Surabhi that, I'm just going to feed her when she asks for it. And, let's see where that goes. And we both were like, yeah, I think that's, you can feed a few more times while retaining the quantity of the meal. Um, and today I don't have any issue. And I have realized that sometimes when she gets agitated, it's out of hunger. Sometimes I've realized that when she gets agitated, it's because she wants to feel that connection. Sometimes she gets agitated because she wants to go and sleep, and we are not accompanying her, to go and rest and like wrap up the day. Uh, does that mean that her behavior is bad or good? I don't know. To me, her behavior is communication. It's indicative of something. She's telling me something, and I just read what she's telling me and I try to meet whatever needs she's asking for. Sometimes she's very clear about what she wants, which is, she goes and topples her bowl, and then I know that she's hungry. It's not connection. Sometimes she keeps, coming to us and then like hover around us, and then, get a little, fidgety with things around. And then I'm like, maybe it could be connection, which happened a couple of days back when my husband was working on his system and I was working on my system, and she started getting fidgety right behind me. And so I just moved my book where I was taking notes, and I sat down with her, and she was fine after that. So it's more of a communication to me, and she's telling me what she's feeling, and I respond to her based on what she's trying to tell me. So when I do work on a case, I firstly need to see if the dog is able to even communicate. If they are not, we need to first bring them to a point where they are not wired up, where they can decompress from stressors, where they have a little break from all of these things, and build a relationship with their humans where they feel safe, um, and can communicate to their humans about what their needs are. So I think that would be the starting point. Uh, One more thing that I've missed mentioning about aversives as well is that, um, when you think about effectiveness of a method, um, and it's working and all of those things, one more thing that we need to keep in mind is that uh, your dog does not necessarily have to obey you in every situation. And when they don't obey you, and they still try to escalate that communication to you, uh, it is coming from somewhere. It is indicative of something, right? So sometimes the escalation is just coming from the point of, I am cornered, and this is about my survival, and I need to do whatever I can to take matters of my own life in my hands and take care of myself, right? So sometimes whatever methods you've used do not yield your results because your dog is firm on their survival needs, on their basic needs, and they don't give in easily. So that's important to consider as well. Some dogs may fall into that criteria. Some dogs just stop behaving in undesirable ways because they either have reached a point of a complete emotional shutdown, uh, or reached a point of learned helplessness where they feel like there's no way out for them from this situation, or they have started to feel unsafe around the people in their family, their caregivers. So they don't feel like they could be authentically be able to communicate to you what they're feeling about an environment. And so it's very easy for us to falsely believe that our dogs, just by virtue of changing their behaviors superficially, that the issues that were leading to these behaviors have been dealt with. Um, so that's also important, that sometimes these methods are short-lived just because you haven't even addressed the root causes of the behavior. And so the dogs continue to communicate with us repeatedly, asking us to listen to them, and asking us to hear them out, and then show up for them. Or they just stop communicating with us entirely, because they are like, there is no point with in me communicating to this person, because I feel unsafe and I don't know what are my consequences just because I communicate them with them about how I'm feeling. Neither spaces are a good space for a dog to be in. It doesn't lead to emotional well-being. It doesn't lead to welfare. It doesn't lead to cognitive abilities, or smooth communication, effective communication. So it's important for us to think about these things as well, and then question about whether it is really solving the problem for the dogs, right? um, Finally, there are a few things to consider when you reach out to a behavior professional, right? I think I made this mistake when I was a dog parent, and I see a lot of people making this mistake repeatedly. This is nothing to do with asking you to sign up with me. This is not a promotional talk. This is not a call to action for sign up with me. Absolutely not. Uh, but it's about letting you know what we need to be aware as dog parents, and what questions we need to be asking of the professionals that are working with our dogs. um, First and foremost, it is important that we remember that the dog behavior industry is unregulated. um, in India, is I can't talk much about other countries, but in India, I have seen people who are, you know, who have been around dogs for a long time, call themselves trainers. And while I understand the idea that education may not be accessible to everybody, and it is unfair to expect education when it's not accessible. It's also important to remember that when a behavior professional is working with a sentient and a sapient being, they are causing uh, emotional, neural, physiological, and cognitive changes for your dog. It can lead to severe consequences if they don't understand a lot of these things. So it's important that we at least know, even if they're self-taught, what is their education, what is their understanding. Do they understand physiological um, physiology of stress? Do they understand basic needs of a dog beyond food, shelter, medical care? What are the basic needs of a dog beyond food, shelter, and medical care? um, what are normal behaviors for a dog to have? What are coping mechanisms? Are they trauma informed or not? Because so many of our dogs have had traumatic experiences, and a lot of their responses are trauma responses. So it's very important to at least be trauma aware and trauma informed when you're dealing with dogs. Are they aware of these things? Uh, are they up to date about current research in the dog behavior industry? So these are few things that I would definitely ask uh, when they're working with dogs. The other is, are they only looking at superficial behavior changes, or are they able to address reasons for changes in behavior, right? There's a book called Beyond Behaviors by Dr. Mona Delahooke. This is about children, um, and how in the parenting world, the human parenting world, there has been a shift to move from just behavior modification superficially through rewards and punishments, to actually go beyond behaviors and ask why this certain behavior is occurring. Try and read that book, and that's very, very relevant to dog parents as well, that we need to go beyond behaviors and look at what is causing these behaviors. So is your dog professional able to do that? Are they able to look at what are the causes, you know, for certain behaviors? At Barks, we take the biosocial psychology approach, which is we look at the biological factors, social factors, and psychological factors that affect behavior. We also look at ethology, which is basically natural, natural dog behaviors. So that's also important to think about. Are they aware of pain and pain symptoms? Because pain can manifest in behavior changes. So these are important questions to think about and ask your dog behavior professional. It's also important to remember. Uh, I mean, I would not, because I did this once and I have never done it again because I managed to see what happened, which is the trainer would take Zoe. We were trying to get her potty trained, and the trainer would take Zoe for a walk, and he would, and this is abuse again, trigger warning. But he would try and insert something in her anus so that she poops. And after that, I have never taken allowed anyone to be in my dog's presence when I am not around, because we don't know how they are treating our dogs when we are not around them. So it's very important that if you have a dog behavior professional interacting with your dog, you have to be around, because you don't know what they're doing if you're not around. Um, which is why I'm not very convinced about board and train services. But you know, I don't know. I'm not one to comment. But when people ask me why I don't do board and train, because I work with biology, social factors, and psychological factors, and what factors are contributing to the dog's behavior in my house may be very different from what is contributing to behaviors in their house. And I would rather work in my client's environment than have to work in my environment. So that's how I would approach, and that's why there's no board and train services that I offer. But it's important to also think about behaviors change based on the people that our dogs are interacting with. Behaviors change based on the environment in which our dogs are interacting in. So, is it really fair to judge a dog's behavior in one environment and try and change it in another environment? I don't know. It's worth thinking about. And I would also obviously, if a trainer is using certain tools, I would obviously not, advocate for those professionals. And those tools for me would be, I don't use choke collars, prong collars, electric shock collars, collars in general, even flat collars, um, yanking, yelling, timeouts, withdrawing attention, crating, isolating, intimidating, water sprays, newspaper intimidation, like holding a stick, all that, like all of that. Anything that can potentially lead to your dog feeling scared, uncomfortable, unsafe, physically or psychologically, is a no for me. So again, what's asking your behavior professional, what are the tools that they're using? Um, I think that's about the things that I wanted to actually share about how to advocate for your dog. What are the things that you need to look out for when you are encountering conversations around aversive methods, or just in general behavior modification methods. Um, and I think there has to be a time when we stop outraging at deaths of dogs because of poor training methods and aversive methods, and start outraging at the start of it, at the beginning of it. 3 years back, when I spoke against shock collars, choke collars, martingale collars, there were enough people who were, you know, calling me out on speaking about these things. Um, but the dog that died recently died of being choked. So I think it's important for us to remember and call out things when you see the first sign of aversives, first sign of discomfort for your dog, first sign of pain, first sign of feeling unsafe, not when things have escalated. Because today, all we can I had asked this question yesterday on my Instagram story, saying that, did you read about the story and how are you feeling about it? And everyone, including myself, felt outrage, felt anger, felt felt like, something has to happen as a consequence of such heinous actions, right? Such violence against animals. Uh, but it's important to think about, how we can advocate for our dogs from the beginning, how we can ensure that they're feeling safe from beginning, and anything that requires coercion, anything that requires our dogs to suppress their regular normal behaviors, anything that takes away their basic needs in life, I think can be um, considered aversive. And I think I would also want to point out some amazing thing that Dr. Gabor Mate spoke about and his definition of trauma. I don't know if I'm fully verbatim quoting him or paraphrasing him, but when he talks about trauma, he says that trauma is not what happens to you, but it is what happens within you because of what happened to you. So, what is considered traumatic for an individual is solely an individual's perspective. Um, I am nobody to decide what's traumatic for you. You are nobody to decide what's traumatic for your dog. And what may be traumatic for your dog may not be traumatic for my dog, right? So, every individual is different. And even when they experience a traumatic event and they consider it to be traumatic, the way they respond to a traumatic event can be different, right? So, uh, this is again a reason why anybody dealing with dog behavior needs to be well informed about trauma and trauma responses, stress responses, because let's face it, our dogs have complex emotional, cognitive structures, and it is not a one size fits all approach, and it is not a, you know, they're not machines where, you code them in a certain way and you input something and you get a particular output. They're not machines. Let's not treat them that way. So I wanted to leave you with that conversation. I have nothing more to add. There is a comment here saying, "Hey, thank you for choosing this topic to address because I personally feel that a lot of pet owners bring home a puppy as a lifestyle choice rather than that they are beautiful, loving creatures themselves who have their own cognition. And these parents expect the dog to give up its own cognition and dance to their orders and to constantly be under their control." Yeah, and unfortunately, a lot of humans, like dog parents, are also conditioned to believe that the only way you're a good dog parent is if you start training your dogs from the first day, and you train them and you keep training them. If they're not listening to you, you use other methods, and or they're not listening to you because you didn't use tougher methods and things like that. So I feel like there's a lot of fear mongering as well that gets that is prevalent in the dog behavior world, where dog parents are constantly under pressure to mold their dogs into a certain socially acceptable way, because if they don't, then their caregiving approaches are questioned constantly. So I feel like it's important to consider that as well when we are talking about why caregivers choose to work with certain dog professionals, or why they choose a certain way. Of course, I don't work with clients or dog parents who don't want to use a empathetic and compassionate way to deal with their dogs. Uh, but I have met more people who wanted to use a more empathetic way, a more compassionate way, but they didn't know any better, or they were not given the right kind of information initially. So I think there is still hope in the dog parenting world, and we can hope that a lot of us want to be compassionate for our dogs, but we are so filled with misinformation around us and fear mongering around us that we have no other choice but to use the methods that are being told to us, which, to be honest, sometimes don't even sit right with us. This happened with me also. I was told to use choke collar for Sammy. I was used to use crate for. I was told to use crate for Zoe. Someone came and then is putting sticks in Zoe's anus just to get her potty trained. These are all abusive and aversive ways, but that's what I was told, and that is what I thought is the right thing to do because I didn't know any better, and I was not told about anything else. Um, which is again why we need to keep talking about how compassionate and gentle ways go a long way in helping our dogs, but also build a great relationship with our dogs, and make them feel safe both physically and psychologically. So I think that's more important, in my opinion, for a caregiver. And if that's your goal, then it can be achieved using compassionate ways as well. So why resort to aversives? As Surabhi very well put in our conversation. I think that's about how what I wanted to talk about. It was a very disturbing news to read. I don't think I've managed to watch the video at all. I couldn't watch it beyond the start of the video, and I realized what's happening, and I couldn't. And I felt like there is no point in feeling sad, angry, outraged at the situation. All I can do in my position as a dog behavior professional is keep talking about gentle ways, empathetic ways, compassionate ways, how aversive methods are not going to help your dog in the long term, and just keep putting that message out there in the hope that there would be some dog somewhere, some dog parent somewhere who sees this, and and we can save a life one at a time. And I think that is more important for me at the moment than feeling sad and angry at the situation that happened with the dog that passed away. I do want to uh, send condolences in whatever manner to the family who lost a dog, and I do wish that the dog rests in peace. And that's about all I have to say about that dog. Um, Thank you for listening in. Thank you for even if you're listening to it later, please drop your thoughts in your comments, and I'd love to keep for us to keep having these conversations over and over again, because that's the only way we can advocate for our dogs and so many other dogs out there who are constantly being dealt with aversive methods even today. um, so thank you for listening in, and keep having this discussion.